Hi and welcome to JohnRayner.tv. In this episode, I'd like to talk about the power of connection, the power of connection, or some might think of the word networking. It's interesting, over the last couple of decades, 20 years or even more, I know that for myself, for many of the people that I've worked with, one thing that some people find difficult to do is to actually connect with others, whether it be in a personal setting, or be it a dinner party, or maybe in a business setting, whether it be a cocktail luncheon or a cocktail evening, or whatever the event might be. But today, let's look at the power of connection, or the power of networking. And when our brains are put under pressure is normally the time that we say and do the wrong things. And for most people, it's been proven that for some it's a fear, it's almost a fear, or at least an apprehension or a dislike to be in situations where they have to connect with others and start the conversation and maintain the conversation, etc. But I remember reading a great book by Dale Carnegie. It's an old classic from many, many years ago, closer to 100 years, I think, where Dale wrote about the ability to win friends and influence people. And it's interesting because if you summarize the whole book, I'm now paraphrasing, that questions are the answer, or questions are the solution. Or let me paraphrase a little more. Questions are the best way to connect with anyone else. And because the way that our brains work, we obviously remember things more when we can attach a visual image, when we can attach something that's quite extreme visually, the more extreme but relevant to the questions or to the information or the data that we need to remember, the more than likely we are to remember it. So listen, I've shown this basic visual to thousands of people, and it's interesting, even with senior management, executives, CEOs, and those who don't feel so comfortable when having to connect, they remember this image. And forgive my artistic skills, that was never my forte, it's never been my strength. But look, if you were to just take a piece of paper and draw this or something similar in a way that makes sense to you, then there's a greater chance that you'll remember the questions that basically are a result of, that can happen as a result of this illustration. And I start with, you imagine you're walking up the path to this particular, what looks like a house. And I'll give a personal example, and then I'll give a business or commercial type example. The first thing you see is obviously the house. Personally, you might ask the other person you're speaking with, where do you live? The geography, where they're situated, how long they've lived there. If it's in terms of business or commercial, where's your head office located? Where else do you have offices or representation? What other cities? What other nations? Etc., etc. You'll see that there's some type of plaque here. I remember back in England, way back when I was a small boy, especially if you went to areas where there was more money around, people would either have the name of their property, they would like to name their property, or they would even use their own name. In my case, John Rayner, so they would have the name Rayner, like the Rayner residence. So in personal, you might like to ask, what is your name? Where does that spelling come from? Where does that name originate from? You can literally have an hour conversation with anyone in a personal sitting at a lunch or a dinner table, just by simply going into the genealogy of their family and their history, or the history of their genealogy. In terms of business or commercial, you might want to ask the person in a business setting the name of their company, what's the origin of the name, why that acronym, etc., etc., etc. Then, of course, you can see that we've got some people that's supposed to represent people here. If it's a personal situation, obviously how many people in your family, how many kids, how many extended family, and again that could be a conversation that lasts for hours when you start to touch on family members and extended family members and those who have gone astray and the black sheep of the family, etc., etc. Obviously in business you might want to ask how many employees, how many in management, how many in middle management, etc., etc., etc. Then we've got here, looks like a dad or someone cutting the grass in the front lawn. That obviously relates to what type of work do you do if it's a personal, what type of work do you do, how long you've been doing that work, why did you choose that work, what inspires you to continue in that work. The list of questions goes on and on just with this one simple imagery here. If it's a business related situation, what is your differentiation in this industry, why does your company stand out, in what ways do you do things, or what working practices do you apply that are different to your competition or others in your industry, etc., etc. And then of course down here it looks like some kids or children playing games. So if it's personal, what sports do you like? What sports are your kids into? The list goes on. And of course, if it's business, what do you do for recreation? How does your business facilitate recreation? What do you do to ensure that your employees are keeping a good and healthy work-life balance, etc. And then this looks strange up here, but this is supposed to be a plane or an aeroplane if it's personal. Of course, one might ask, well, what type of holidays do you like? What type of vacations do you appreciate? Where have you traveled into the past? Where's been your best destination? Why? Tell me more about it. And of course, if it's business, hey, tell me where you travel to, tell me where you're located or where your clients are. How often do you need to travel? In what other ways do you become more efficient and more effective with or without travel? The list of questions goes on. And last but not least, the insignia or the image on the tail of this plane. It's supposed to be a light bulb, with the shining illustration, and of course that represents ideas and passion. So if it's personal, what's your ideology, what's your theology? Maybe you want to stay away from religion, but what's your ideology, what's your philosophy on life? What ideas do you have? What's your passion? Where do you see yourself in the next few years? What ideas do you have to change the world or at least a community? And of course in business, tell me about the strategy, tell me about the blueprint, tell me about the next 18 months. How do you see yourself boosting business 3 to 7 times in an 18-month period? That's our slogan, by the way, for some of our clients. And so in terms of this illustration, it's a very, very simple thing. I know that my drawing skills are not top shelf. They're not the best. But look, if you were to literally just memorize this, or even better, just draw it on a piece of paper once, twice, or 3 times yourself, and then think through some of the personal and the commercially related questions that you can ask in order to better connect with others in a personal or business setting, you'll be quite surprised. Quite surprised. I've had non-managers, I've had junior managers, middle managers, and senior managers who are not quite comfortable in initiating connections say to me, John, I walk around with this image in my mind, and whoever I meet, obviously we don't start with the house and then move to the people in the house and then move to the working and the sports and no, there's no science to this, or there's no logic in the way that we approach. We might start with the person with the passion. We might start with the work. We might start with the family and the kids. We might start with the name. So the idea is to just have this image in your mind so that when you're standing back, instead of thinking in a networking situation or a place where you're responsible to connect, instead of thinking, what am I going to say, and the pressure's on me to say something, and unfortunately most people under pressure, they'll talk about themselves too much and keep talking about themselves too much, and the other person's just looking starry-eyed, almost knocked out. But again, back to connection, the power or the most powerful way to connect is by asking questions, and this illustration can certainly help to stimulate the right questions to ask. I hope this helps. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode of JohnRayner.tv. Ciao.